Leviticus 23, 1 through 8. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, These are the appointed festivals of the Lord, that you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed festivals. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord throughout your settlements. These are the appointed festivals of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall celebrate at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to the Lord. And on the 15th day of the same month is the festival of the unleavened bread of the Lord. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not work at your occupations. For 7 days you shall be present at the Lord's offering by fire. On the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall not work at your occupations." So we just read a part of Leviticus 23, and what we have happening in this chapter is God speaking to Moses, and Moses establishing an order and a rhythm of the year. You hear that God is appointing these festivals, the festival of the Passover and the unleavened bread. It goes on to talk about the festival of the first fruits and other festivals and celebrations that are throughout the year. Now this may seem a little vague to us, but these festivals and times of year go on to be the major Jewish celebrations throughout the calendar. And they still are with us. Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, all of these originate from this declaration in Leviticus 23. So why are we talking about major Jewish festivals as we say, what's the point? Well, today, friends, we continue our series when we're talking about what's the point, and we're talking about the church calendar and why that matters. And we start here in Leviticus 23 because it is our origin story. From this moment, these appointed festivals, more celebrations and dates are added to the calendars and the cycles of the year. As the story of Jesus unfolds and his life and ministry take place, more dates are added that are significant to his life and ministry, dates like Christmas and Easter. And the calendar becomes this cycle of celebrations and remembrances for all people of faith. And it's significant to us because we may overlook this idea of rhythm and sequence in our life. But I think if we spend some time with the church calendar, we find that it has some deep significance to us. What you see in front of you here is a very rough outline of the current Christian calendar year. We start in Advent, not on Christmas, but the first Sunday in Advent. Advent takes us to Christmas. Christmas takes us to Epiphany. And then we're in what we call ordinary time. Ordinary time takes us to Ash Wednesday, which is today, which starts the season of Lent. Lent takes us to Easter. Eastertide takes us to Pentecost. And after Pentecost, we're back in what they call ordinary time all the way to the first Sunday of Advent. Now, why does this matter? Well, maybe you grew up in a church that celebrated or changed colors of vestments or stoles for the pastors, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you grew up in a church that didn't have any liturgical colors in their celebrations, but you did celebrate those seasons of the year, like Advent, Lent, and Easter. Well, I think it's important for us to kind of, no matter where we are in the spectrum, to remember the origins here in Leviticus 23 and what it means for us. Because whether we're even aware that a church calendar exists, I think it provides some deep wisdom and application for our lives. And that's in at least a couple of ways for me. The first is, it's about connection. I mentioned that in Leviticus 23, Moses is establishing these festivals, and we don't have the name of the month in the particular version that we read. It says in the 14th day of the first month. Well, the original name for that first month of the Hebrew calendar was Aviv, which means barely ripening. It had to do with crops. There's other dates and months in the Egyptian calendar, and the first day of that month literally meant green ears of corn. It had to do with the cycles of the earth. So many of these festivals and these celebrations had to do with when it was time to plant, when it was time to harvest, when it was time to celebrate and prepare for the winter. It had to do with the cycles of the earth. And as an agrarian people, the Jewish folks were deeply connected to this rhythm. As we celebrate this rhythm, though we're not necessarily putting crops in the ground, it still reminds us that the earth has cycles, that our soul has cycles, that we go through seasons of our life, and the church calendar can honor those seasons and rhythms. I remember when we were expecting our first child, we found out that news that we were pregnant just a few weeks before Advent. Now you'll know that Advent is the season that leads us up to Christmas. And in Advent, we celebrate with Mary and Joseph as they find the news that they are expecting the Christ child. Well, it was a very different experience for us expecting a child along with Mary and Joseph as we went through that story in that particular season of our life. It felt different as it honored the rhythms in our life in that moment. There are rhythms and sequences that sometimes feel out of place and disjointed from our current experience. For example, today on Ash Wednesday, we will celebrate and we will put ashes on people's foreheads and we will say, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Now that feels a little out of place when I put dust and ashes on the forehead of my 7-year-old, because I don't want to be reminded of mortality in that moment. But friends, it means something altogether different when I place ashes on the head of someone in their 80s or someone who's recently been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The rhythms and the cycles of the church can meet us where we are, and maybe we're not in that season now, but soon we will be. The other thing that the church calendar offers us is a measure of accountability. Because there are difficult parts of the Christian story. There's difficult parts about the story of the people of God and how they've journeyed and failed and missed the mark. I'd rather not tell those stories, if I'm honest. If it were up to me, I might pick only passages about joy and forgiveness and the good parts of the story. When we're invited into the rhythm of the church calendar, we're invited to tell the story. And friends, we're invited to tell the whole story. In its pain, in its uncertainty, in its doubt, in its sometimes lack of God's presence as it feels like, what are we supposed to do next? All of that is in the story and the rhythm of the church calendar. And we miss so much of God's presence with us when we overlook those difficult parts of the story. And the final thing that I think the church calendar offers us is humility. There's something that's deeply humbling about the fact that I'm not the first one to celebrate these major holidays, these major rhythms of the church. There's something deeply humbling about the fact that I'm not the only one. And like I said, sometimes my story aligns with the church calendar, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's Christmas Eve, and I feel in my heart like it's Good Friday. And sometimes I feel like it's Easter morning during the season of Lent. Sometimes I'm not always aligned with that church calendar rhythm. But friends, there's an invitation there too, that there's a bigger story at play, that it's not just about my particular circumstances or our circumstances as a community, that there's a bigger story in the story of God, and we're invited into that story no matter where we are. And the last measure of humility that we find in the Advent calendar is that just when we think we have it figured out, the story starts over. You would like to imagine that if you've been around the church for 20, 30, 50, 80 years, you've celebrated a fair share of Easters, Pentecost, Advents, Lents. Wouldn't you like to think that you've figured it out by now? Wouldn't we like to think that we have that story in our hearts and our heads? But friends, there's a reason that we tell the story every year. There's a reason that we celebrate Ash Wednesday every year, because we need to be reminded where we've put our hope and our faith and our trust in things that aren't of God. There's a reason that we light the same candles of the Advent wreath of hope, love, joy, and peace every single year, because we need to be reminded that we are still on that journey pursuing those things. So friends, whether you are aware of what season we're in, or whether you're aware that we even have a church calendar, I want to invite you into this space of reflection this week. That no matter where you are in the season of your heart and soul, the calendar and God has a space for you. That whether you are feeling like it's Good Friday in your heart, or whether you are feeling like it's Christmas morning, celebrating new life and new hope, there's a space for you in the story of God. And to me, that is deeply peaceful and gives us space to breathe and to experience our full life and full humanity, because it's enfolded in this story of God. So friends, no matter where you are this week, no matter where you are this season, know that God sees you and that God has a place for you in a greater story. May you find peace this week. Amen.
Season turn in daytime to every purpose time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embrace. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to